Hi, everyone. This is Rob Packard from Medical Device Academy. I am live this week from Las Vegas. I'm on vacation, but we're still doing a live streaming video. This week's is about what are the most common things that people forget to do when implementing a corrective action in response to a quality audit finding or an FDA inspection. So everybody thinks about, what do I do during the audit? What do I do during the inspection? But at the very end, you get a piece of paper from the auditor, a report, or you get a 483 from the FDA inspector. And it's that next step that's absolutely critical, because you can do everything else right, but if you don't do this part right, you're going to have problems later on. So the most common thing that we see is people don't take any action at all for a week or two or three. You need to immediately initiate a CAPA. So that's the first thing. But what needs to be in that CAPA is really important. If you've designed your CAPA form properly, it should be easy. But if you have a poorly designed CAPA form, go check out our CAPA form on our Medical Device Academy website, and it'll actually give you a checklist. Here's all the things that should be in your CAPA form. But the most common things that people forget are what we're going to cover in this video. Number one, containment. So if the quality audit finding or the FDA inspection finding is related to product, so there's something that's an issue with your product. You find non-conforming product on the floor. You have something that failed the test. There's something broken, something not right, labeling's wrong. You have to contain that problem. You have to put that product as non-conforming product. And unfortunately, sometimes you have product that's already shipped because you've been making it incorrect for quite some time. And in those cases, you might have to implement a recall. So it's really important, number one, contain the problem. Whatever you've got in-house, you contain it. Whatever you've got on the production line, you contain it. You label it as non-conforming product. You segregate it from all your good product. And then you evaluate what product do we have potentially in the field, at distributors, in our warehouse, at customers that we might need to recall. So that's number one, containment. Number two, you need to correct the problem. Just because the quality auditor found one thing or the FDA inspector found something, you have to correct all the examples of that problem. So as part of your investigation of root cause, you're supposed to go out there and look at additional examples or potential records or production lines. Depends on what the problem is. So let's say it's a maintenance issue. Look at other equipment that requires maintenance to see if that same maintenance issues exist other places and correct it for every single instance. One of the most common ways to get a warning letter from an FDA inspection is when you did your investigation of root cause, you only looked at the specific examples the FDA inspector found, and you corrected those. But you didn't look at any other potential issues. And people don't like that answer, but that's what the FDA writes up warning letters for. So if you had 400 complaints in your system and the FDA inspector samples 10 of those and finds problems with all 10, you can't just correct those 10. You have to go back and look at all 400. And people say, well, how far do I have to go back? Typically, the FDA expects you to go back to the last inspection. That could be 2 years ago. It could be longer. So they expect you to go back to the last FDA inspection, look at all the records back to that date. And that's a lot of work. People don't like that, but some of those might need reporting. Some of those might need recalling. So that's why they expect you to go back that far. Number three, you need to implement corrective action. So containment, correction, and then corrective action. The corrective action usually involves updating a procedure, updating a design of a device if it's a product issue, implementing training for people. So those are the three things that we typically look at: is procedural changes, training changes, and product changes if it's specific to product. So those are the three things you need to look at for a potential corrective action. So those are the first things that people forget when they initiate. They'll open up a CAPA, but they'll take too long to open it, and they won't include containment, correction, and corrective action in their CAPA plan. Now, let's say you do that part right. it would be really helpful if when you're looking at your CAPA log or you're looking at CAPAs, you can figure out where did this CAPA come from? So make sure you put a reference, some kind of cross-reference in the CAPA record to the source of the CAPA. Was the source of the CAPA a quality audit? Which quality audit? Because you might not just do one big quality system audit a year, you might do many small ones of different processes. You might have had more than one FDA inspection in a year. So just saying it's an FDA inspection might not be enough. If your company is going through a PMA, a pre-approval inspection, and had a routine inspection, you might have two audits in the same year easily, or two inspections in the same year. Another possible source would be non-conforming product. You could have an audit from a certification body. You could have multiple certification bodies coming through your facility if you make multiple types of products that aren't all covered under one certification body. So identify what the reference source is for that CAPA. It's possible that you even said, well, this finding is the same as this other finding that we already initiated a CAPA for, so we're going to combine them into one CAPA rather than initiate a new CAPA. We're going to just pull those two projects together, but you need to include both cross-references. So that's important. Number 3, did you do an adequate investigation? Now, I already touched on this slightly, where you have to go back and look at other records of that type to make sure you've covered all the instances of this problem, not just the one that were found by the auditor or inspector. So it's really important that you make sure you do a thorough investigation of root cause. Investigations of root cause should say what records you looked at, what you looked for, how many records you looked at. You're trying to establish what is the percent occurrence of this problem. Does it happen 1% of the time, 0.1% of the time, or 10% of the time? And you're going to react slightly differently based on that percentage. If it happens 1 in a billion, does it really make sense to even open up a CAPA for this? The investigation of root cause may say, this is a one-off mistake. This is not a reoccurring problem. This is not worthy of a CAPA. You might not be sure. You might not have enough records. You may only have one instance of this ever. So one of one. In theory, it's 100%, but we don't know if this is going to be a reoccurring problem. Maybe it's the first time you've ever done that process or made that product, so we don't know yet. In those cases, what you might do is you might say, we're going to create a quality objective or establish a metric for monitoring this on a regular basis and see if this happens twice. And in those cases, then we'll implement the corrective action. But let's monitor it first. We'll correct it, we'll contain it, but we're not going to open up a CAPA until we know if it's going to happen twice. And so that's important because some things only happen once at initiation. The next item to look at would be, is your CAPA risk-based? And risk-based, a lot of people misunderstand what that means, aren't quite sure how to implement it. But the whole concept behind a risk-based quality system comes from ISO 9001 and ISO 1345. It's one of the new things that they added in there as a requirement. It's also in ISO 19011 2018. That was one of the audit principles that they added, was having a risk-based approach to auditing. So things that are more important in a repeat findings, things that might have an impact on actual product safety, those should be sampled more than things that wouldn't be. That would be an example of a risk-based approach. So how are you going to take a risk-based approach to your corrective actions resulting from an audit finding or an FDA inspection? Well, first of all, the timing. And this is usually where people start and stop. They just look at timing, and that's the end of their risk-based approach. So don't stop there, but to address timing, the FDA requires that you respond within 15 business days. So that's 3 weeks. You should do that. You should also do the same thing or faster for your notified body findings. Most of the notified bodies expect you to respond in 2 weeks, 15 days, calendar days. If you have one set of rules for the FDA, another set of rules for your notified body, and a third set of rules for everything that you find internally, that's really not going to be nearly as effective as just saying, across the board, we're going to always require that we do corrective actions in this, or implement the corrective action plans in the same amount of time. And keep in mind, this is just the plan for your corrective action. So we're always going to respond in 2 weeks, would be my recommendation, because that's the worst case scenario, and it builds your team's experience into, we always respond to this amount of time. That's what we always practice. We don't have different rules for different types of findings. They're all create a plan in 2 weeks. That way you're prepared for the worst case, no matter what. And the FDA isn't going to complain that they got it a week early, and your internal auditor shouldn't be at the end of the line and getting the worst service. All auditors, whether it's an FDA inspector, whether it's a notified body auditor, or it's an internal auditor, respond in 2 weeks to all of them with a plan. Now, the plan is just the plan. The actual corrections might take quite some time if you have to correct 400 complaints. If you have to redesign your product and revalidate that design, that could take years, if not longer. A lot of times it's months, but it's not going to be weeks or days for a redesign of your product. Even if it's software, you're probably not going to be able to do that in days. It's going to be weeks or months. So you need to look at what is the realistic timeline for that. And yes, once again, risk-based. So if it's something that's product safety, it should be prioritized. Your containment should be immediate because it's a product safety issue. Your correction should be immediate, but the corrective actions have to take the time that it's going to take to validate properly, so they might take longer. Another aspect for risk-based approach is what percentage of confidence your effectiveness check is going to be. So if we do a process validation, we're going to make a process change and we're going to validate that process change. You can have a percent confidence or a CPK for process capability that could be used as an acceptance criteria for that process validation. You could have a 90% confidence level. You could have a 95% confidence level. You could have 99%. You could have 99.999%. That level of confidence that you've established, or your process capability number that you choose, whether it's 0.8, 0.9, 1.0, 1.33, or 2, whatever you pick for that acceptance criteria for process validation could be risk-based. So is this something that's going to affect cosmetics of the product? Is it going to affect productivity and amount of scrap we have? Or is it going to be a product safety issue that we have no other way of checking for it except this process inspection step? So if it's something really critical for product safety, you're going to want an extremely high acceptance criteria, or extremely tough acceptance criteria, high process capability. So that's another example of how you would do risk-based, and it would be in your effectiveness check or your process validation, which could be one and the same. I always say, if you're going to make a process change or a design change, whatever your validation report has for acceptance criteria should be quantitative, if at all possible, statistically derived, and risk-based. So that's another example of how you would apply risk-based. So it's not just about time. People are being lazy and picking something really simple. Here's evidence that I met the requirement, but they're not really embracing the concept of having a risk-based approach to the entire CAPA. So think every single step of the CAPA, not just the number of records you look at, not just the amount of time you respond to a CAPA with a plan, not just how quickly you implement the corrective actions, but all the way to the effectiveness check. Think all the way to the end, every single step, apply a risk-based approach. And in order for it to be risk-based, it's really going to have to be quantitative in some way. The next item that people often forget is to complete the CAPA before the next time that process area is going to be audited. It creates an actual problem for you and can result in escalation of findings by a notified body, by an FDA inspector, if you haven't finished the corrective action before they come back. Now, if it's a design revalidation, you have a reason why you haven't, because we can't get it done that fast. So it's in progress and it's according to our plan. But if you said you were going to finish a procedural change in 30 days, they come back a year later and it's still not done, If it's FDA, it's going to be a warning letter next. If it's a notified body, it's going to get escalated to a major next. Or if you're using an MD-SAP system, it'll be bumped up in terms of the escalation rules to the next highest number. And if it's an internal audit finding, whoever the internal auditor is should be taking it from minor to a major, because it's a repeat finding, you didn't address it in a timely manner. So that's one of the things that people forget a lot, is to make sure the CAPA is done before the next time you audit, unless the plan specifically said it's going to take longer than that to implement. All the actions that could have been done before then should be, but the ones that can't, it should be documented in your plan that that was the plan, and here's a rational reason why. The last item is the effectiveness check. A lot of companies will have the mistaken impression that when the notified body comes back, they're going to check our CAPA plan. They're going to do their own effectiveness check. So why do I need to do my effectiveness check? Because that's part of the CAPA process. The notified body is doing spot checks. They don't have time to do a thorough effectiveness check. You're supposed to do that when you close the CAPA. You're next supposed to schedule an effectiveness check. If you were doing a process validation or design validation, the acceptance criteria was in the protocol up front. You determine whether you met it or not, and so you have a very quick, objective effectiveness check. Some things, like a manual process, like cleaning validation, we changed our procedure. People weren't following procedure, weren't documenting it. We changed it. We retrained people. We changed the procedure. Now you have to do a re-audit to make sure that people are doing that. It's not something that's automated that you can write a report for. You're going to have to actually go out there and make sure that they're actually doing it to the new procedure. Observe them doing it. Have them show you. Have them demonstrate. Have them show you records of that. Sample it on multiple people, multiple shifts. Be very thorough. If it was worthy of opening up a CAPA, it's worthy of taking your time to make sure it never happens again. So do a thorough effectiveness check. So that's the last item that I had on the list. These are the things that people forget to do when they open up a CAPA for an FDA inspection or an internal quality audit or a third party auditor like a notified body. And I'll recap the different items. Number one, when you initiate the CAPA, you fail to initiate containment, correction, or corrective action. So one of those three, if not all three. Number two, you forget to reference the CAPA source or sources if there's more than one. Number three, you fail to do an adequate investigation of root cause and go back and look at previous records that possibly are additional instances of the same issue. And that might expand the need for more aggressive or more comprehensive corrective actions. Is your CAPA risk-based? That's a requirement. Complete the CAPA before the next time that area is audited or inspected by an FDA inspector, and make sure that your effectiveness check is done before the next audit or inspection. So if you found this helpful to you, please don't forget to boop the like button, and that way other people will know, hey, this is a good video, and that gives me feedback. So please push the thumbs up. Yes, there, somebody did it. Thank you. And if you don't like this, put a comment below and tell me what you don't like and what I should fix. In the description down below, when this posts, it's going to have some additional things that we're going to be doing as new topics going forward. The month of October, we're going to be covering quality auditing. So we're going to have some additional videos about quality auditing and some blog posts about quality auditing. The month of November, we're going to be working on CAPAs. In this particular topic, kind of hits on both areas. The next one we're going to cover in December is going to be supplier quality management. We have a couple of blogs that are going to be coming out in the very near future on that. Matthew Walker's been working on supply chain disruptions and supplier shortages or shortage reports from the FDA as well as Canada. So we've got a couple of supply chain articles that we're going to be posting as well. If you have any suggestions for other topics that you think that we ought to cover, please put it in our suggestion box. There's a link in the description for the suggestion box as well. I also am going to be having a surprise video next week. So normally we do one every Friday. So next Friday at 12:30 Eastern time, We're going to have another live video like we normally do on Fridays, but we're also going to have one next week much earlier than that. Probably on Monday is when it's going to go out as a live video. I haven't scheduled a time yet, so maybe you'll get lucky, maybe you're not, but it'll be recorded anyway and posted after the live streaming. But the topic is going to be the new FDA guidance document, draft guidance document on the FDA eSTAR. So we had done some videos in the past about and training about FDA eSTAR, but now the FDA has a guidance document, a draft guidance document on the eSTAR program. So that's the signal, hey, the eSTAR program is moving ahead. It's not just a pilot anymore. Now we've got a draft guidance document. The next step would be to approve it and make it a final guidance document. And then people would be using that as the main source of submission. I haven't read through the whole draft guidance myself yet, and I don't know how it will end up final, whether we're going to have both the traditional submission of an e-copy and the FDA e-copy guidance and an eSTAR submission, or we're going to have one or the other. It would make sense to me if they had both for a while before they completely commit to one versus the other. But one of the things we've found from creating eSTARs ourselves is that it takes more time. So it's actually more work to do these eSTARs, but it's less work for the FDA. They don't need to do an RTA screening checklist. So that helps them. But at the same time, it's more work for you because there's a lot of information that they would normally look for in your documentation, and they're asking you to enter it in the eSTAR. So that'll be a new live streaming that we're going to do next week, and I hope you like it. But thank you very much for everybody participating in this week's live session. And I will be doing a new live session next Friday. And as I said, the surprise one earlier in the week, probably on Monday. Thank you and have a great weekend. Bye-bye.